6 years ago, my grandma, Marjorie Tick, died. 10 days before her death, David and I went to Longboat Key, Florida, to spend the weekend with her. She had advanced cancer, and we all knew it was the end of her life. On Friday afternoon, my grandma said she wanted to have Shabbat dinner. No one was in a particularly good mood given the circumstances, and having a nice meal was not on anyone's radar. But we set the table and arranged carry-out food. Then my grandma announced that she wanted to go to the salon to have her hair washed and blown out. She was not a woman who frequently got blowouts, and she barely had the strength to stand up. But she took her walker, and with my parents' help, they went to the salon. My grandma was a golfer, a tennis player, a woman who just a few years earlier made a solo expedition to Antarctica to do the polar plunge. Anyone who knew her could have predicted that she was going to take advantage of every moment in her life. I was inside the apartment waiting for them to return from the salon when I heard the keys jangle in the lock. And I watched them enter, and I'll always remember the sight. My grandmother stood in the doorway, flanked by my parents. As she shuffled inside, her back curled over, every step was labored. My grandma knew it was the last time she would be outside, the last time she would breathe fresh air, the last time she would feel the sun on her skin. Her body was so frail, yet she carried herself with strength, and on her head sat perfectly smooth, bouncing beauty shop waves. She looked as if she wore a silver crown. She made her way to the Shabbat table and took her place at the head. I recited the blessings with hot tears stinging behind my eyes and a lump in my throat. My grandma knew she was not long for this world, and she wanted to confirm her legacy: family, connection, tradition. She was looking death straight in the face, as if to say, "I will not let you take my dignity. I will hold my head high. I will choose life." This morning, we read the ultimate command in Judaism. God says, "I put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you may live." On the surface, this instruction sounds so obvious. It's baffling it would even need to be said. Who would choose death? But I submit we do choose death, spiritual death, when we stop trying to better ourselves, when we refuse to be vulnerable, when we continue carrying around old regrets. And if it were easy to choose life, God wouldn't have to say it, and we wouldn't have to remind ourselves of it every year. We find ourselves at the beginning of a new year, and if we want it to be a year of choosing life, then it's time to start thinking differently. In his recent book, Think Again, Wharton psychologist Adam Grant explores the power of rethinking. He explains, intelligence is usually seen as the ability to think and learn, but in a rapidly changing world, there's another set of cognitive skills that might matter more: the ability to rethink and unlearn. We're great at rethinking our possessions, our clothes, renovating our homes, but Grant explains, when it comes to knowledge and opinions, we stick to our guns. Psychologists call this seizing and freezing. We laugh at people who still use Windows 95, yet we cling to opinions that were formed in 1995. We listen to views that make us feel good instead of ideas that make us think hard. Yom Kippur was designed to make us think hard through rehearsing death. Today we are instructed to behave like a corpse, abstaining from the things that living people do, like eating and drinking, bathing and sex. Some people make this death rehearsal a dress rehearsal, and to services they wear their kittel, their white burial shroud. Yom Kippur marks the death of the old year, the death of the old version of ourselves, so that there can be new life. We rehearse death so that we can see our lives with clarity. I cannot stand the clarity of seeing myself on camera. Unfortunately, when you work in a synagogue, every sermon and every service lives online forever. David loves to watch me on the live stream. I'll come home from services and he'll be watching the stream after putting the kids to bed. When I see myself on screen, I have to physically leave the room. It makes my skin crawl to hear myself trip over a word and grab the wrong tense. To me, my voice sounds weak and I make wild gestures. The distance between me and my mind's eye and the clarity of me on screen unsettles me. Today, we view the live stream of our behavior from the past year. You hear the short-tempered tone you use at home. You see the cold body language with which you greet your spouse. You watch yourself mindlessly scroll your phone while your child waits to play. But today, you cannot leave the room. You cannot pause the stream. You have to see yourself as you really are. The whole world is a narrow bridge between nothingness at the beginning and nothingness at the end, writes Rabbi Allison Tick. We spend our whole lives on this precarious span, unaware that we're even on it. And then one day we wake up and see it, and we feel terror. We say to ourselves, my God, what have I been doing with my life? The High Holy Days are a bridge, a compressed journey from birth to death in 10 days' time. Rosh Hashanah is all about birth, and Yom Kippur is all about death. Today, we step off the bridge to observe ourselves from a distance, the first step in rethinking what we should do differently this year. Last night, we recited the Kol Nidre prayer. It states, all vows, let them be discarded and forgiven. Why do we say a prayer releasing vows? Rabbi Naomi Levy explains, we all start life with an open, curious, loving heart, and then we get hurt. Someone lets you down, someone shames you, someone breaks your heart, God does not answer your prayers, so we start making vows. Vows like, I'll never get fooled like that again. I'll never talk to him again. I'll never forgive her for what she did to me. These vows construct walls around us to protect against future hurt, but then they also block joy and surprise and romance from getting in. On Yom Kippur, we release ourselves from these protective, limiting vows. We must let go of our past assumptions. Our survival depends on it. Consider the story of the Man Gulch fire. On a broiling August day in 1949, 15 smoke jumpers parachuted from the sky to contain a wildfire in a Montana valley called Man Gulch. These specially trained firefighters, carrying backpacks with axes and chainsaws, arrived at Man Gulch to begin digging a line in the soil to direct the fire to an area with less flammable grass. The dreadful combination of 97-degree heat, dry air, and the steep slope of Man Gulch created terrible conditions. The foreman of the smoke jumpers was named Wagner Dodge. A few hours into the mission, Dodge hiked ahead of the group, and he saw that the conditions had worsened. Fire raced toward them, and soon they were trapped by flames 30 feet high. The only escape route was up and over an extremely steep incline. Dodge ordered his men to drop their backpacks, to lay down their steel axes and run for their lives. About half dropped their backpacks and half did not. And 12 smoke jumpers died in the next few minutes with safety in sight because they could not outrun the fire. The U.S. Forest Service concluded that if they had put down their backpacks sooner, the smoke jumpers would have reached the top of the ridge before the fire. For firefighters and other emergency responders, tools are essential to their mission. Responders are trained to use their equipment to save lives, and so discarding those tools requires accepting the need to pivot, and abandoning equipment that's essential to their identity. The reluctance to drop one's tools when threat intensifies is not just a problem for firefighters, writes organizational theorist Carl Weick. Navy seamen sometimes refuse orders to remove their heavy steel-toed shoes when they abandon a sinking ship. Fighter pilots in a disabled aircraft sometimes refuse orders to eject, preferring instead the cocoon of oxygen that is still present in the cockpit. And Karl Wallenda, the world-renowned high-wire artist, fell to his death still clutching his balance pole when his hands could have grabbed the wire below him. Dropping one's tools is a proxy for unlearning and flexibility. Survival requires laying down these tools. The generation of people who left slavery in Egypt and wandered in the desert, they were not permitted to enter the Promised Land. Tradition says that they were not permitted to enter the Promised Land because they could not let go of their past. Instead of letting the experience of slavery reshape them, they remained psychological slaves, fixated on Egypt, and unable to lay down their old heavy tools. We all hold on to tools that once had purpose but now impede us. We cling to false assumptions and tell the same self-limiting stories about ourselves. But today, we can lay down that backpack of burdens and grudges and liberate ourselves so that we can run to safety and run to wholeness. We humans were created with limitless capacity, souls that have no boundary about how deep they can reach and how high they can soar. But we all have potential that hasn't been developed yet because the circumstances of our lives haven't required it. Some circumstances demand growth, like change in health, change in relationship status, job transition. I went through my own job transition recently. I used to work at Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan, one of the largest and most majestic synagogues in the world. Temple Emmanuel is a bastion of excellence and an amazing congregation. During the years when I worked there, I loved it when strangers would ask me, "What do you do?" I was so proud of my position and, frankly, quite impressed with myself. Then David and I moved to Chicago to be closer to my family when he had a work opportunity here. The timing was off-cycle from the season when congregations hire rabbis, so I started doing freelance work and spent most of my time taking care of our now 3 children. Suddenly, when people asked me, "What do you do?" the answer wasn't so clear to me, and I had to rethink my identity, updating interests, friends, how I introduce myself. Sometimes we have no choice but to rethink our lives. But without that external pressure, we have to force ourselves to rethink. The Yom Kippur liturgy attempts to guide us there. Soon we will recite the confessional prayer and will say, "We are guilty, we betray, we steal, we scorn." Even if you don't think you committed these sins, you use the first person plural, "we did this." The language forces us to see our participation in evil and violence. Our willingness to rethink assumptions has profound consequences. Have you ever heard of super forecasters? Super forecasters are people with the extraordinary ability to predict the future. They compete in tournaments where they log predictions to questions like, who will be elected president? What will happen to the price of Bitcoin? Excellence in forecasting is not predicted by intelligence, ambition, or experience. The single most important driver of forecasters' success, Adam Grant explains, was how often they updated their beliefs. The average person in a forecasting tournament will make a prediction and update it 2 times. Forecasters update their predictions approximately 4 times per tournament, going through twice as many rethinking cycles as ordinary people. The best super forecasters are eager to rethink, And after they make a prediction, they often write down a list of conditions that would cause them to change their mind. Because once you have an opinion, it's natural to become attached to it and seek out confirming information. So the list of conditions that would change their minds keeps them honest. Our task today is to open ourselves up to rethinking and to commit to doing it often. In the devastating Man Gulch fire, the flames reached what's called a blow-up stage, a sudden increase in fire intensity that makes control impossible. The fire grew by nearly 5 square miles in 10 minutes. When the foreman Dodge saw the blow-up, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out matches. He lit the matches and he threw them on the ground around him and burned the ground around where he stood. The smoke jumpers watched Dodge in disbelief. Why was he creating more fire? Dodge pleaded to them, "Follow me, boys, in here," and he motioned them to come join him in the burn area, but they refused. Dodge covered his mouth with a wet towel and he laid face first on the ground. Because he had already burned the grass around him, when the big fire reached him, it was robbed of gasoline. He survived on the oxygen that was close to the ground. This was the first record of someone creating an escape fire, now a widely used survival tactic. On Yom Kippur, we build an escape fire, a small fire around us to rob the big fire of its fuel. We practice a small death to prepare us for the big death. None of us knows when it will be the last time we breathe fresh air, when it will be the last time we feel the sun on our skin, or the last time we will walk back into our homes. So we rehearse today so that as we walk along the narrow bridge, we will choose life. I put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. We choose death when we cling to stale opinions, when we assume we're right, and when we fear being wrong. Today, the book of life waits for us to inscribe ourselves. In this new year, may we lay down the heaviness that impedes us. May we rethink our old assumptions, and may we choose life. Shana Tova.